This is your first class today. Um, I don't know, Jacob. We don't have off Quarkus access to the TA list, and so I guess if you joined the class since Quarkus went down, then you may not have a TA assigned to you at all. In which case, the instructions were to write me, and then I could assign you one. You could still do that. Send me an email, and then I will jump to it. So shortly after 11. If you already had a TA and you just don't remember who that is, yeah, I guess you can attend, a tutorial of who you think it is for now, and then we'll hopefully kind of get that sorted. But it's one of those things like the winter semester instructors not be able to access their grades. The only place TAs were assigned is on Quarkus, and we don't have a list of that. So we know, everyone who went to tutorial last week, if they remember who they went with, like obviously that you're in good shape. Those who don't know, who joined late, we kind of need to speculate here a little bit. Um, Amana, I can't onboard you right now, having missed three classes. So if you once you've gone up to speed with the course materials that's available, you reach out to me by email, and then I can answer all of your questions that way. Okay. Invariably, right? Like students who join courses late, in the best of circumstances, they have some catching up to do. And in the circumstances where Quarkus was unavailable for a couple of days, it did make life a little bit more difficult, at least until yesterday, when the material is now up. But I promise you, I mean, if there's flexibility in a course where every student can afford to miss some submissions, and so you have not lost any grades that you can't make up. If that's the sort of the main concern, you will be able to do the work. Yeah, the details of sort of how that works. That's in the syllabi, and that's in the material that's been shared already. Evelyn's asking, I can't open the lecture recording info. There's no sounds or pictures. Is this normal? Do I need something to solve it? Um, I'm not sure, Evelyn. I guess it depends if it's a problem only is experiencing versus others. I've had I had the links tested, meaning I've had people go in there. They're MP4s, they're files. So you need to download them. You need to press and download that file. And then an MP4 is a very, very, very common extension. It's something that any Mac or any PC should be able to play. I guess there's a possibility. I mean, I don't know. I guess there's a possibility that particular devices, I mean, phones can play MP4s. Tablets should be able to play them as well. So we should troubleshoot that. I don't want to assume that everything is all right, and then if there's dozens of students who can't access. But what's under that folder is it's the actual full recording. So you normally you'd be able to download that file, and then after that you press play from whatever native software on your phone would be able to play that. I have time for a couple more questions before class starts. I mentioned Quarkus may not be back before this. Is that the case? Will it for my fellowship to in person? Yeah, so that's a good question, Spencer. No, it wouldn't happen. I mean, there is a world if we knew that Quarkus was down before the semester started. Other plans, other arrangements may have been made. This course may have been advertised as a course with in-person exams and or assessment, but that is not what happened. And so we will not, there's no world where we will move to in-person. I mean, the truth is, I don't know the numbers, but there might be, 50, 75, 100 students enroll in this course who are not physically in Toronto right now, and we're not going to make them fly or come back to Toronto, because Quarkus is down. Like there's hundreds and hundreds of summer courses at U of T, and so there will be a solution or solutions, plural, that will be rolled out if we can't handle Quarkus at all. I don't have an answer to that right now, but hopefully, I mean, there's another meeting with an update for the chairs and associate chairs and directors and principals this afternoon. If it was good news, it would be an email and they tell us Canvas is or Quarkus is going to be back up later today. So it's probably not going to be that, but I don't know yet what they're going to tell us. The tutorial activity that will be for today, Ake, that will be talked about by your TA. So we're using Google Forms today. Leonardo, there's no lecture four slides yet up on Dropbox because we're in it right now. The partial set will be shared with students in 1 minute, in 2 minutes, and then the full set will go up there after the lecture. That's how it works. Okay, good stuff, Evelyn. And if you can't get in there, get in touch because if it's impacting one person versus 12 versus 50 versus 100, like we that will be different troubleshooting. But we want to make sure people have access to those. We have a great problem if they don't. Okay, so that said, I'm going here to post partial set. Welcome, welcome to lecture four. Um, day 5, I guess not quite day 6 yet. We'll reach sort of day 6 once we're in sort of late afternoon, but day 5.5 of Quarkus outage. And so, yeah, presumably you're here. It's because you got the email updates and you've got access to the Google Doc and the Dropbox where course material is there. I don't have any other major updates since I wrote yesterday, other than to say I'm continuing to sort of roll out different alternatives to the learning management system as we have received no assurances of what the timeline is for its return. I don't want to parlay the sort of the mood of what's out there. But yeah, it could be today, and it could be it could be who knows, time undetermined. The communication from university right now is that they know that Canvas is back up in some other colleges and universities. But what most colleges and universities are waiting for is called a third-party attestation. And so that means like um, a, a cybersecurity, a digital security firm that goes in there and does an audit and makes sure that the students and faculty and the university using Quarkus is not a security risk. That by continuing to use it, we're not continuing to expose data and information that then could be used for nefarious purposes. And so that attestation has not been done yet. It's not completed yet. And so that's why we're here. A handful of students have been granted access because there's hundreds of deferred exam from the winter term for graduating students. And so that's why Quarkus has been selectively being given access to a few people for a period of 24 hours, just so they go in, grab course materials, and then get out. And the same was done with instructors to submit their grades for the winter term. But the general population, faculty, students, TAs, we don't have access to Quarkus yet. Or if we do, it's for a few minutes here and there while they're sorting things out on their end, but it's not stable. It's not there for. Okay. So that's the admin. Yeah, we've got our lecture to kind of get to. Of course, we have Victoria Day next Monday, so there is no class on next Monday. So our next lecture after this is a week from today, on May 20th, and that will be our last substantive lecture for the first half of the semester. So things are moving quite quickly. They've been disrupted, but they're moving quite quickly. I guess the last thing I will say is we continue to have all assignments in terms of peer contributions and lecture reflections suspended. That means that there's nowhere to submit them right now. There's no deadlines attached to those for now, until an alternative has been set up, which I'm hopeful will happen in the next couple of days. So with that being said, Maybe I'll put the lecture slide one more time for those maybe who came in just a little bit late. And I guess now we'll get started on media. Yeah, it's a good question, Zhuang. I don't have an answer to that right now. An alternative will need to be set up, and then explain how it will work. I don't want to, I can't, I don't want to speculate about what that will look like. So when I have information on that or an update on that, I will of course provide it. So we are dealing today with, why am I slide not moving? Okay, different kind of technological issues. Um, Here we go. So we are talking today about the media, which is, of course, a very, very big piece of the picture. We have so far, after introducing the discipline of sociology and sort of broadly what are the kinds of things that sociologists are interested in, the next 2 weeks were some of the foundational building blocks of society, of communities that we live in. And that's the topic of culture, which is sort of the content of what gets passed on. And then, of course, after that, we have the topic of socialization, social interactions, which is the mechanisms by which oftentimes those ideas, those beliefs, those values, and knowledge gets passed on or gets passed from one generation to the next or gets passed from one group of human beings to another. And so today we are talking about media, which, is both a significant way in which ideas and beliefs and values get promoted or move or circulate. And it's also a topic that has to be dealt with if you're interested in the 21st century specifically, but also that was the case in the 20th century. It's a topic you have to engage with as a social scientist if you're interested in understanding people, in understanding groups, in understanding the institutions that are around us, because media intersects with all of it. It is the vehicle through which a lot of people get their information, right? You get information from your own personal experiences. You get information from the people that you talk to that are in your life. But a very significant amount of information that we have is coming from these media sources, an array of media sources. So we have media, which also connects with kind of the question when I talked about epistemology and ontology, sort of a few lectures ago. It is oftentimes the answer to sort of how do we know what we know? And a really big piece, big answer to that is which media sources, what media consumption am I engaged in? And why do we do what we do? Again, media is a really sort of important piece of sort of the picture. So as consumers, as we said here, we wear certain clothes, we participate in activities, we are into particular movies, we have hobbies we're interested in, how we see ourselves, meaning like again, connecting on the topic from Monday, which is the self-concept and identity. We are all really, really impacted by the media sources we consume and the media platforms that we participate in, both as consumers, but also increasingly as active participants. We are creating on various media platforms like the Instagram, the TikToks of this world. We're creating content. Several of us are creating content that then also become objects of consumptions for other individuals. This graph here is a StatsCan infographic. Again, always really kind of great source of information that lays out the media consumptions in Canadians. And so there's a couple of different things in there. A reminder that when I'm presenting statistics or sort of data like this, There's no element of me that thinks any of you are going to remember any of these specific numbers. It's not about that. It's about sort of the general messaging that's in here. So we have what is the most common methods for following the news or current affairs? And now 80% of people are getting used to the internet. And part of that is tracking change over time. You're looking at magazine, newspaper, radio, 11, 36, and 40%, and television in 67. You go back 100 years, and radio and newspapers are the principal sources of information. You go back about 50 years to about 25 years ago, and television is the dominating media through which people are getting their news and information. And now, of course, what we call social media or media online or media accessed online are the principal source. There is on the right, those with university degree were more likely than those with no university to report what? Using the internet, newspaper, and magazines for content. So those are the pieces of info. If we're comparing internet and television, just because that's the seismic shift of sort of before and after, there's a strong generational piece, right? 55 years and older, still 88 to 63% comes from television. But as soon as we get into the 35, 54, then it flips. Many more people are getting their news online. And then finally, for the generation 15 to 34, overwhelmingly, people are getting their news from online sources. So you have from this graph, the principal kind of takeaway of this is the idea that the locale of where people are getting their news has shifted relatively recently. That's interesting unto itself because the internet and televisions have very, very different characteristics. Um, and we're going to talk about that in a bunch of different ways today or this morning. But one really significant way is that there is many more choices. It's not countless because it's not a social scientific term, but there is innumerable options out there for people to get their news from in an online environment, as versus traditional television that even with access to several dozen channels and frankly even access to several hundred channels, that is a drop in the bucket compared to the range of options that are available to people in terms of getting their news through a digital platform. I don't know how many of you have heard of the expression fake news. I would presume that a decent sort of amount. That term was not in the zeitgeist until sort of a few years ago, but almost 10 years ago now. It was named Word of the Year in 2017. And the definition for fake news is something that's false, often sensational, information that's disseminated under the guise of news. So essentially, it's incorrect information. It's false information. It falls under the category of sort of be misinformation. People will use and talk about the intersecting between fake news and the notion of sort of propaganda, but it's something that is not real. And yet that presents itself as depicting reality. And so that term was popularized by the current and former President of the United States, Donald Trump, in the leading up to the 2016 election. So really, again, in the later part of 2015 and 2016, and really kind of using it to create distrust, to create a wedge between potential voters and news item and news information that were circulating at the time and continue to circulate at the time. The term fake news has been used by a significant number of politicians, frankly, other public figures, including sort of celebrities, when there's news items that come in and are unfavorable to them, that are providing negative coverage. That negative coverage, it's not always clear whether that negative coverage is in fact false, but there is oftentimes this sort of pushback against these news stories that says these are biased news stories, these are news stories that have been fabricated, these are news stories that were put together to purposely make somebody look bad. And so there is the goal of labeling a particular set of news, or frankly, a lot of news as fake news, is to delegitimize those news sources. It's to delegitimize those journalists is to delegitimize, in a way, when it's done wholesale, the entire mainstream news apparatus as being unreliable, as being biased, as having an agenda, which you're hoping people will discard. You're hoping people will ignore. So that if there's a headline that happens on a given day, let's say today on March 13th, that's incredibly negative towards a public figure. Um, but there has been this ongoing sort of mistrust and distrust in news sources that's been activated over the course of several months or several years. Then what you're hoping is that people will dismiss this news story, will not pay it attention, and will treat it as no more than sort of fabricated gossip, and won't give it any more legitimacy than that. There has been and this is important for a couple of different reasons, but sociologically, this is important because and Trump has not been the only one, but Trump has declared on numerous times that the press, which he oftentimes means the mainstream press, as the enemy of the people, right? That the entire media apparatus is corrupted, and that the media apparatus and whatever work we would deem them to normally be sort of doing, it's not doing it sort of properly. And these tensions have continued. We continue to see this. There's news stories on a semi-regular basis about a very conflictual relationship between lots of media sources, including a lot of mainstream media sources, and then members of administrations, including the people at the very top. There's been a decent amount now of social scientific work on the topic, and there is something really, really, again, sociologically important about the topic of fake news. And part of that is that fake news have an outsized impact on people's opinions and people's sort of exposure to different stories compared to legitimate stories, compared to stories that are true. In the largest study of fake news that's been performed, they looked and investigated news stories, verified true and verified false stories on Twitter between 2006 and 2017. So over the course of sort of a 10-year period. Their data set was over 126,000 stories, again, tweeted by over 3 million people, more than 4.5 million times. Now, how did they determine which stories were true or false? They relied on the information from fact-checking organizations. They're meant to be nonpartisan fact-checking informations. There's a number of them out there that verify the work, and that will assess the validity of news stories. That's the world we live in right now. And so, in order to determine that a news story was true or false, they wanted at least 95 to 98% agreement across these different organizations. So if three or four organizations said yes, this story is true, and then one organization said this story is false, and one said they weren't sure, then that is not enough agreement to have made this study. But here's the thing. The results, and at the time were shocking. Now we've known it just for a little bit, and there's been further work, but it still remains one of the sort of largest scale study that's been done on the topic, is that false stories that have very little merit, that are not bound to sort of reality, diffuse, they travel much farther and faster and deeper in all categories of information than actual true stories. The effects were especially pronounced in political news stories that are false, things having to do with terrorism or natural disaster, science, financial information. But really, what they found is that the kind of what we talk about, like clickbait headlines, or headlines that are sort of shocking, were more likely to get engagement. Somebody who sees a true story, and they may have some extraordinary things that's true, but people who see a true story will click on those sort of occasionally. But when there's these headlines that are outlandish, these claims that are being made about people, about events, about things that are really hard to believe, it's not just the folks who have a propensity to believe in them who click on them, but it's also curiosity from folks who might be quite skeptical about the story who want to read it for themselves and see what's going on. We know that the stories that are false, and this is again more recent work on Instagram and on TikTok, have replicated this. Stories that get the people's blood boiling, people that will make people react in a really hyper sort of negative way, are also have a tendency to be more popular, to create more engagement. So now what you have, both from traditional sort of news sources, possibly, but certainly in an environment where there's lots of news content creators creating stories that are pushing the boundaries of reality, or crossing that boundary sort of entirely, are more likely to get engagement. And because a lot of these creators, including smaller news sources, frankly, it also applies to mainstream news sources, are compensated, broadly speaking, on the level of engagement that people have with their site, with their content, what they do with it. It pays. It pays to essentially work with, and propagate and spread false information or incomplete information. And so what you have is, whether the false stories are inspiring fear or disgust or surprise, um, what you have is the novelty piece, the shocking piece, the level of engagement piece is higher with those. And so you have, and other types of study are sort of following this. You may have one event that took place, and there's 8 or 10 different news sources that are reporting on slightly different aspects, slightly different angle of that one event. And then you have 1 or 2 sources that are making outlandish claims about what happened. Like those two are getting significantly more traffic than the 10, in both at the individual level, but also sort of collectively. Um, so so the impact, for us, means that you don't need 60, 70, 80, 90% of people out there to be engaging in purposeful, intentional, or unintentional spreading of false information. We know that any amount of sort of false information that's making its way into these social media ecosystems are likely to travel quite far. Russell's asking, wonder if what's considered as false in this study. I know Politifa has a truth meter that ranks them from completely false to completely true and everything in between. Something like 74 that true element. Alternatively, that has 75 per true could be considered blankly true. That's a really good question about methodology. The ratio of sort of how much in the story is false or is true, and where sort of the piece fits. Obviously, a more in-depth, like when you have a political speech, oftentimes organizations like PolitiFact will look at the whole speech and won't just sort of label the speech as a whole, but will talk about elements within it. They'll identify, for example, here's the 12 claims, 15 claims, 20 claims, 25 claims that were made, and then they'll assess the claims on their own individual sort of merit of true and false. And then once you aggregate all of that together, then you can say the speech was mostly true, but also, so then you could use some statistics like that. For this study here, they were looking for that 95 to 98% agreement, so they need people to be on the same page, and they were looking to contrast false stories from true stories. So most likely, but I don't know that. It's a good question about the methodology behind it, but most likely they took questions to which there was a really high level of consensus about them being fully true versus having them relatively little merit to them. Otherwise, you're murkying what you're trying to do. You don't really have two good control groups, and it becomes a lot harder to be able to make any claims about true versus false if you're comparing a 55% true to a 45% true story. That wouldn't really give you the kind of analysis you'd want to have. No, normally opinions and predictions aren't part of that. That's a good question, Dana. You have, when you're these types, and I'm not talking about this study specifically, but when we're talking about fake news, normally we're not talking about opinion and predictions. We're talking about things that present themselves as news. And so, what is news? News are meant to be like things that happen. The claims are being made about who bombed what and who said what and who was, drunk at the job or not drunk at the job and who pressed the button and who said what to whom. We're talking about factually based claims. If somebody is a pundit, if somebody is offering an opinion or somebody's offering a prediction or somebody's offering an analysis, those fall under more editorial than news sort of item. And historically, but it's a good question because historically the boundaries between editorializing and news divisions used to be kind of quite clear. Certainly, we'll look back at sort of newspapers and frankly, television coverage for a while would really oftentimes make it clear this is news versus these are pundits, this is opinion makers. Now the boundaries are a little bit more loose than that. If you're doing a content analysis of a news site, be it CBC or BBC or CNN or Fox, you have on a page you're moving from content that's meant to be news to content that has a really strong opinion analysis sort of piece to it. And as a consumer, the boundaries between them are not as clear as they used to be. But again, that's a very good question. So fake news matter for us for all the reasons that media matters to us because it impacts people, but the incorrect false stories and false information have an outsized impact on individuals out there. Um, because of the novelty, sort of like the morbid kind of curiosity piece that drives people to sort of read them. And then who are also at the same time, I'm going to get to notions of trust in a little bit, who are believing these stories and not dismissing them sort of out of hand. Some of them are more outlandish than others. Some of them are more incredulous than others, but they're not just sort of entertainment, trivial and dismissed out of hand, but they really move the needle in terms of shaping public opinion. So the just like we talked when we talked about culture, that the sociologists working in an area are the cultural sociologists, and we talked about on Monday that the label for a lot of the work that we were doing is social psychology. Um, the sociologists that are focusing on media and focusing on the impact of media, oftentimes they understand themselves as being part of sort of digital sociology, and so that's the label for the subfield in sociology that really is interested in these questions. And what they do is they take the concepts and the tools and practices that are available to social scientists and sociologists more broadly, and they're interested in looking at how these digital tools and how these platforms intersect with the social world in all kinds of different ways. And that's what we're going to be, of course, again, sort of doing over the course of this morning. Before that, just a few quick sort of definitional piece. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but there is oftentimes a little bit of mixing up of different things having to do with sort of the key term. Even though it's not in the ranked order here, sort of on the side, I'm going to start with media. Media is a specific communication. It's people engaging in communication with one another, and usually it involves and refers to um, the mode of communication that's there between people. Mass media is an aspect of that refers to communicating with really large numbers of people distributed over time. There isn't an exact definition, even within communication studies, that says you need to be able to reach 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people to count as mass media. But writing in your journal and having only you look at that or a handful of people that you're close to sort of know of that, that's not an example of mass media. Getting your work out there where it gets consumed by others and it gets spread and reconsumed and engaged with by a larger number of people, then we are talking about a mass media platform. Communication technology, and your chapter did some work at distinguishing these. That's meant to be broader, that includes the knowledge and techniques and the tools that we use to connect with one another, to create entertainment, to create news. History, again, lots and lots of dates here. The main takeaway for this slide is not the dates. It is useful to think about the development and the history of mass media because each of these inventions, in their own way, and some more than others, led to a pretty significant transformation, really significant impact on society as they were rolled out. The printing press at the very top of that list. In 1450, we're talking about the mass production of books, right? Books going from something that is a luxury item. Only a handful of people can really, in society, can really afford to buy books. They are done one at a time, hand transcribed. And because of that, literacy is it's not a thing. People don't need to read. People are not reading because books are not accessible. Books are not around. Books are not a commodity or an object of consumption for the general public. The printing press cuts the cost down on the production of books by an astronomical amount, and means that books really quickly can be mass produced much more cheaply. And so books start to circulate more. The quantity of books explodes. In fact, there's some really cool graph. I could have brought one of those, but really cool graph that shows the number, the estimated number of books starting in the mid 15th century all the way until several hundred years later. It's just a literal sort of explosion. So the mass availability of books then gives the rise to the need for literacy because suddenly being able to read and knowing how to read becomes something that is a cultural capital, something that there's an it's worth the investment. There are books around, and there's books that people will want to consume for a variety of reasons, both for entertainment, but also for work, also for education. And so the printing press is at the very top of the list. We have the first daily newspaper in the early 1700s, the start of photography in the early to mid 1800s, the telegraph, the telephone. That's a really big one. Again, 1875, really kind of shrinking the world, allowing people to communicate much more quickly. Movies, radio, commercial TV. Yeah, there were TV around in the late 1920s and in the early 1930s in Canada, but most household, especially middle class household, did not get television until closer to the early to mid 1950s. We have the VCR, the microcomputer, which leads to sort of the broader sort of computer revolutions, cell phones, and a World Wide Web. All of these also had massive and continue to have massive impact. You could add to that the smartphone and the avenue of sort of AI. They would both fall and be sort of follow-ups to sort of this. The key takeaways is that each of these is a significant shift. But when we talk about evolution of technology, there's two modes that get used to sort of describe it. One is called the generational model, and the other one is called disruptive innovation. The generational model is that it's a small iterative change. That means it's a small change from one generation to the next. They have access to slightly better there's slightly new avenues that are open, so new technology, new mode of communication that is a small shift from what was there before. A disruptive innovation is there's a clear cut before and after. Like the world as we know it change on a vast level because of this new mode of communication. This is the new mode of mass media. And so communication specialists, digital sociologists, are interested in the impact that the technological development have, and then this is part of the language they use in order to analyze and make sense of that. I've referred to communication studies a couple of times. It's actually not an undergraduate degree here at University of Toronto, but it is in some other places. There's the Faculty of Information where people can get a sort of a graduate degree. I think they're working, and if not, sort of hoping to roll out a Bachelor of Information sort of soon, which will be the closest to sort of this. But Marshall McLuhan and Harold Adam Innes and McLuhan are Canadians, and they're pioneers on the world stage as it pertains to communication study. They did their work, at least sort of primarily. There's a ComTech program at UTM. That's good to know. Thank you. So, that's a beautiful interjection. Speaking from a St. George perspective, because I'm teaching here on the St. George campus, communication is a thing at UTM. So, folks who might be particularly interested in this, I would assume there's some courses you can take both in the summer and fall and winter that you may be able to have access there. So, thank you again, Caitlin, for that. So, Innes and McLuhan talk about how each form of media really impacts not just like, oh, it's a different piece of technology, but it transforms what we are exposed to in terms of information. It transforms the set of interactions that we have with one another. It transformed the way in which large institutions sort of operate. And a quote that they've had and that's been around, and if any of you have caught sort of the Canadian Heritage sort of minute, usually about Innes and McLuhan, usually will be in there. The idea that the medium is the message. Oftentimes, the medium is understood, medium as in like it's the tool you use to communicate. That's not the message. The message is what you're actually texting to your sibling or your parent or your friend or your coworker. The message is what you write to them, not the fact that you're using the phone. But they're trying to make a point when they say the medium is the message, is that the platforms and the tools you are using shape shape how you communicate with people. They shape what is possible and not possible. And of course, in the 2026 sort of era, as you move through different kinds of platforms, and this is a really small sliver of it, right? YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and Discord is only a handful of these pieces. We could add many more to that. Um, you're you, it creates possibilities for communication. You have particular group and particular people who gravitate towards many of these platforms to fit different purposes. WhatsApp, which use a lot, Reddit, that's not on here. There's lots of others that are out there that people use for different purposes. And the structure of the platform is more than just a background. And each of these platforms has a structuring effect, going back to the structure agency piece, that ends up shaping what we see, how we interact, how we make sense of it, how our identity is tied to this, how it shapes the kind of interactions we have with people we know, with people we don't know. Is it anonymous? Is it just with friends? Is it purpose? Is it affinity-based groups? And then what is the kind of communication mode? Is it sort of text-based? Is it images? Is it a mix? Is it video? Is it micro video content? Is it content that people are consuming the original content, but also the engagement that's there? So commentary and analysis. What Twitter does out there and why people go to that platform is oftentimes very different than why people go to YouTube or people go to Twitch or people go to Discord. I don't need to probably hammer that point too much. It's probably more obvious to you now than when I started teaching on some of this stuff before most of these platforms existed a little while back. So the medium of the message, the meaning of that quote is that the platform itself, the communication tools themselves are relevant and are interesting, are an object of, from the perspective of sociology, sociological analysis. From the perspective of Innes and McLuhan, like one of the reasons why communication studies was a field that needed to exist because it has a whole set of questions and sets of interests and sets of puzzles that it can figure out and can really investigate using the tools of social science, sometimes the tools of social humanities in order to understand it better.